My parents sold our family home to fund my brother's startup. Then he lost it all. There are places that exist in the marrow of your bones, places so deeply woven into your identity that losing them feels like tearing away pieces of yourself, leaving nothing but raw, exposed wounds. For me, that place was our family home. It wasn't just four walls and a roof. It was the echo of childhood laughter in sunlit hallways, the smell of my mother's cooking drifting through worn-out curtains, the tiny pencil marks on the doorframe that measured our heights year after year. It was a living thing, a breathing relic of everything we had been, a monument to every hardship we had endured and overcome together. And then, without hesitation, without warning, my parents sold it. Not because we were struggling, not because they had no choice. No, they did it for him, for Ethan, my golden child brother, the visionary, the one they had always looked at like he hung the stars, while I stood in his shadow, unnoticed, my existence a mere afterthought. It all started with an idea, one of his brilliant ideas. A startup, he had called it, with the kind of manic enthusiasm only men who have never faced real consequences can muster. He spoke in grandiose terms, throwing around buzzwords like disruptive innovation and market domination as if he had already conquered the world. My parents listened, enraptured, nodding eagerly with every word that left his mouth, their eyes alight with the kind of blind faith they had never once afforded me. When he said he needed capital, they didn't hesitate. When he said it would take a significant investment, they barely blinked. And when the solution presented itself, the sale of the home that had cradled our family for generations, there was no discussion, no family meeting, no moment where they sat me down and said, "We're thinking about this. We know it's a big decision. How do you feel?" There was just a statement. Cold. Final. We sold the house. I remember the moment those words left my father's mouth. The world around me seemed to tilt. The ground beneath my feet suddenly less solid. The air left my lungs, but they kept talking as if they hadn't just ripped away the foundation of my entire life. "This is an investment in the future," my mother said, smiling like she was bestowing some great wisdom upon me. "Ethan is brilliant. This will change everything for us." As if I had any part in this decision. As if I were included in the dreams they had pinned on my brother's shoulders, in the imagined riches they had already spent in their heads. I had always known, deep down, that Ethan was their favorite. It was in the small things. The way my father would beam with pride every time Ethan so much as opened his mouth. The way my mother would defend him even when he was blatantly in the wrong. The way they expected me to be understanding every time he took more than his fair share. But this was different. This was them making it clear, in no uncertain terms, that Ethan's future was worth more than my past, that his ambitions outweighed my memories, that my grief, my loss, my feelings were nothing in the face of their blind, desperate belief in him. I didn't fight. I should have. But I was too stunned, too sickened by the sheer finality of it all. The house was already sold. The papers were signed. The keys were handed over to strangers who would paint over the walls and erase every last trace of us. By the time I could breathe again, it was too late. Ethan's business collapsed in 6 months. Not slowly, not in a way that allowed for course correction or recovery. No, his empire crumbled in a spectacular, gut-wrenching implosion, taking every last cent of my parents' blind faith with it. It was almost poetic, really. At first, there was denial. "These things take time," my mother insisted, her voice brittle, her eyes darting toward Ethan like a mother watching her child teeter on the edge of a cliff. Then came the excuses. The economy, the investors, the lack of support. Finally, there was silence. A silence thick with unspoken regrets, with shattered dreams they didn't want to admit had been foolish from the start. The money was gone. Every last dollar. There were no returns, no miraculous turnarounds, no golden parachutes. The startup hadn't just failed, it had burned to ashes, leaving behind nothing but debt and humiliation. And our home? Our home was gone forever. They didn't talk about it. They didn't even acknowledge what they had done. I watched them, waiting for something, anything. An apology, a sliver of regret, some sign that they understood the magnitude of their mistake. But no. Instead, they continued as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't gambled away our past on a fool's dream and lost everything, as if I were supposed to move on, to act as though my childhood hadn't been sold to the highest bidder for a business that never even made it past its first quarter. And Ethan? Ethan, true to form, refused to take responsibility. "It wasn't my fault," he muttered one night, nursing a coffee as he sat on my parents' ratty new couch, the cheap one they had to buy after selling off their furniture to pay off some of his debts. "You wouldn't understand. You don't know what it's like to take risks." I laughed, a hollow, sharp sound that made him frown. "You're right," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I don't know what it's like to fail that spectacularly." His expression darkened. "Screw you." "No, screw you," I snapped, all the anger I had swallowed down for months finally spilling over. "Screw you for dragging them into this. Screw you for being so horribly selfish that you let them throw everything away for you. Screw you for not even caring that we lost our home because of your stupid, reckless, pathetic excuse for a business." His mouth opened, then closed. He had no defense, because deep down, even he knew I was right. But my parents? They still couldn't bring themselves to hold him accountable. When I turned to them, expecting something, my mother only shook her head. "Don't be so harsh," she murmured. "He tried his best." I stared at her, disbelieving. "His best," I repeated, my voice dangerously low. "His best cost us everything." My father sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's just money," he muttered. "We'll be fine." I felt something inside me snap. Just money. Just money. No, it wasn't just money. It was our home. It was my childhood. It was every holiday, every late-night talk in the kitchen, every bit of security we had ever had. But they would never understand that. Because to them, it was just money. Because to them, Ethan was worth the risk. And I never was. That was the moment I knew. I would never matter to them the way Ethan did. They would never see me as anything more than a bystander in his story, a supporting character in the grand narrative they had written in their heads. But I refused to play that role any longer. I stood, and in the calmest voice I had ever used, I said, "I'm done." And I walked away. Not just from the conversation, not just from their home, from them. I left them behind that night. But the past has a way of clinging to you like wet fabric, suffocating, inescapable. Walking away should have felt like freedom, a clean break from years of neglect, from the suffocating burden of being the family's afterthought. But even as I put miles between us, even as I drove through the city with no clear destination, just the desperate need to go, I could still hear them. My mother's empty excuses, my father's exhausted sighs, Ethan's indignant defensiveness. I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. Why had I stayed as long as I had? Why had I tolerated their favoritism, their reckless decision-making, their ability to make me feel like a footnote in my own life? Why had I kept picking up the pieces every time they shattered something? Maybe I had been waiting for something that would never come. Acknowledgement, regret, a moment where they would look at me and finally see me, not as Ethan's sibling, not as an extra, not as an obligation, but as someone who mattered. I laughed bitterly, gripping the steering wheel. I had been delusional. They had made their choices. And now, it was time for me to make mine. I wasn't going back. Not now. Not ever. In the weeks that followed, I did something I hadn't done in years. I focused on myself. I threw myself into work, accepting extra shifts, taking on projects that had once felt like too much. I saved, I planned. I envisioned a future that had nothing to do with them. A future where I wasn't the one cleaning up after their mistakes. And yet, no matter how hard I worked, there was something I couldn't shake. The house. The house that had held my childhood. The house that had stood through every storm, every hardship. The house I had thought would always be there, until they sold it out from under me for a business that crumbled faster than their denial could patch over. I told myself it didn't matter, that it was just a house. But that was a lie. I couldn't let it go. So one evening, against my better judgment, I drove back to the neighborhood, not to see them, not to let them pull me back into their orbit, but to see it. What I found left me breathless. The house was still standing, but it wasn't our house anymore. The new owners had stripped it of everything familiar. The garden my mother had planted? Gone. The faded blue shutters my father had always promised to repaint but never did? Replaced. Even the old oak tree in the backyard, the one Ethan and I had climbed as kids, the one I had sat beneath on quiet afternoons when I needed to be alone, had been cut down. It was as if we had never lived there at all. I stood outside, gripping the cold metal of the car door, staring at the home that was no longer mine. I didn't belong here anymore. I had known that before coming. But somehow, seeing it made it real. I wasn't mourning the house itself. I was mourning the illusion that some part of my past could be preserved. That no matter how far I went, how much time passed, there would always be a place that felt like home. But home wasn't a place. It was something I had never really had. I was about to leave when my phone rang. I nearly ignored it, until I saw the name flashing on the screen. Ethan. I should have let it go to voicemail. Should have blocked his number, erased any connection between us. But some twisted part of me needed to know what he wanted. I answered. What? A beat of silence. Then, his voice, uncharacteristically quiet. Where are you? I almost laughed. Why does it matter? He hesitated. I wanted to talk. I leaned back against the car, exhaling sharply. About what? Another pause, then softer. I screwed up. I stiffened, not because I hadn't expected it. Eventually, Ethan always circled back, tail between his legs, looking for someone to reassure him that he wasn't the villain of his own story. But this time something in his voice sounded different. Genuine. And that was new. I said nothing, waiting. He sighed. I thought I could fix it, you know? The business. I really believed I could make it work. I closed my eyes. And I lost everything. The words hung between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said, not everything. You still have them. A sharp, bitter laugh. Do I? I frowned. What are you talking about? They're mad at me, he admitted. Not for selling the house. Not for what they did to you. But because I failed. I should have felt satisfied. I should have enjoyed hearing that the golden sun had finally fallen from grace. But all I felt was exhaustion. They'll get over it, I muttered. He sighed. I don't think they will. I frowned. Why not? A long pause, then, they want me to fix it. I blinked. Fix what? The house? The money? All of it, he said, his voice hollow. They think I can somehow undo everything, that I can make it right, but I can't. I let out a slow breath. And what do you want me to do about it? I don't know, he admitted. I guess I thought you'd understand. That hit me harder than I expected, because I did understand. For years I had carried the weight of their expectations, their disappointments, their reckless choices. I had been the one they leaned on whenever things got hard, the one who picked up the shattered pieces while Ethan was always excused, always forgiven. But now he was the one being crushed under the pressure. For the first time in our lives, Ethan was seeing them for who they really were, and it broke something inside of me. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. So, what now? I don't know, he admitted. I don't have a plan. I don't have anything. He sounded like me, like the sibling who had been left behind, expected to survive while they placed all their bets on someone else. I could have hung up, could have told him it was his turn to figure things out alone. But I didn't, because no matter how much I resented him, no matter how much he had taken from me without even realizing it, he was still my brother. And if there was one thing I knew better than anyone, it was how to survive when the people who were supposed to love you the most let you down. You have a choice to make, I said finally. You can keep trying to fix something that can't be fixed, or you can walk away. He let out a slow breath. Like you did. Like I did, I confirmed. Another pause. Then quietly, was it worth it? I thought about it. About the weight that had lifted from my shoulders when I finally stopped trying to be enough for them. About the peace that came with knowing I owed them nothing. About the freedom of choosing myself for the first time in my life. I nodded. Yeah, it was. And this time, I meant it. I should have known that one conversation with Ethan wouldn't be the end of it. That the unraveling of everything we'd ever known wouldn't happen cleanly or quietly. That the wreckage left in the wake of my parents' blind devotion to him wasn't something he could just walk away from, even if he actually wanted to. But there's a funny thing about people like my parents. They don't let go. They don't admit fault. They don't accept consequences. They cling. They demand. They twist reality until it fits the narrative that lets them sleep at night. The one where they're always right, always justified, always the victims of some cruel and unfair world that just refuses to recognize their brilliance. And this time, they had lost too much to simply fade into denial. This time, they weren't just wounded. They were desperate. And desperation? It makes people dangerous. It started small. A text from my mother, cloying, insincere. "We need to talk." A call from my father, ignored, followed by a voicemail that was nothing but a deep sigh and a muttered, "Call your mother back." And then Ethan again. This time he wasn't quiet. This time there was no hesitation, no reluctant admission of guilt or responsibility. No. This time his voice was tight with frustration, with exasperation. "You need to come home." Home. I almost laughed. "We don't have a home, remember? You sold it." His sigh came through the receiver, sharp and irritated. "Can you just drop the attitude for once?" That nearly set me off right then and there. Drop the attitude? I pressed my fingers to my temple, inhaling slowly, willing myself not to explode. "Why are you calling?" "They want to fix things." I let the words hang there. Let them sit between us like something foul and rotting. Fix things. Not apologize, not make amends. Fix things. Like this was just another minor inconvenience, a temporary setback, a bump in the road on their delusional highway to success. I clenched my jaw. "Let me guess. By fix things, you mean they want me to fix it." Another sigh, sharper this time. "Look, they lost everything. They're struggling." My hands curled into fists. "And?" "And you're doing fine," he said bluntly. The sheer audacity of it made my vision blur with rage. I was doing fine? I had scraped and clawed my way to stability while they threw everything away on his half-baked fantasy, while they gambled with our history, while they shoved me aside without a second thought. And now that their grand experiment had failed, now that their golden child had crashed and burned, they were looking at me, the backup plan, the one they had never invested in, never prioritized, never valued, to clean up their mess. I should have hung up, should have laughed in his face and left him to drown in the wreckage of his own making. But there was something in his voice, something that wasn't just arrogance, wasn't just entitlement, something close to fear. "They're out of options," he admitted finally. I exhaled slowly, forcing my voice to stay even. "So what? They expect me to bail them out? After everything?" He hesitated. "Not just you." I frowned. "What does that mean?" Another pause, then quieter. "They want to take out a loan." I blinked. "A loan?" "Yeah," he muttered. "But they need a co-signer." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. "No. Come on, don't be like that." I said no. "They're desperate," he pressed. "They can't get approved on their own. They don't have anything left to offer as collateral. But if you—" "I'm not co-signing a damn thing," I snapped, my patience finally snapping like brittle glass. "They'll lose everything," he said, his voice rising. "They already did," I shot back. "And whose fault is that? Because it sure as hell wasn't mine." Silence. Heavy. Stifling. Then his voice, low and angry. "You're really just going to let them suffer?" I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Suffer? Ethan, they chose this. They chose to sell our home. They chose to bet everything on you. They chose to act like I didn't exist. And now, when it's all fallen apart, they suddenly remember I exist?" More silence. Then softer. "They're still our parents." I closed my eyes, forcing back the tide of emotions rising in my throat. "No," I said, my voice calm. "They're yours." And then, before he could say another word, I hung up. I blocked his number that night. I blocked my parents too. I wasn't playing this game anymore. For years, I had let them dictate the rules, let them treat me like an afterthought, Let them put Ethan on a pedestal so high they couldn't even see the wreckage he left behind when he fell. But I was done. I wasn't going to be the one left picking up the pieces. I had spent too long living in the ruins of their choices, too long letting them take from me without giving anything in return. It was over. I was free. And this time I wasn't looking back. Cutting them off should have felt like the ultimate victory. It should have been satisfying, like finally closing a book that had tormented me for years, like walking away from a smoldering wreck and never looking back. And for a while it was. The silence was a gift. No more calls, no more guilt-tripping messages, no more thinly veiled demands for money, for help, for me to fix what they had shattered with their own reckless hands. I wasn't holding the weight of their failures on my shoulders. I could breathe. I threw myself into my work, into my future, into building something that was mine. No longer tethered to them, no longer forced to watch from the sidelines while they poured everything into Ethan and left me with scraps. But despite everything, there was still something that lingered. Not regret, not guilt, just a quiet kind of grief. Not for them, but for the family that could have been. The final test came 3 months later. It was a Saturday evening when the knock came. I almost didn't answer. But then, I looked through the peephole. Ethan. He looked different. The arrogance, the easy confidence that had always clung to him like a second skin, it was gone. He stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes shadowed. A man who had finally run out of options. I should have ignored him. Should have let him stand there until he got the message. But something in me, the part of me that had always been stupidly loyal, that had spent years protecting him even when he never deserved it, opened the door. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then, he exhaled. They lost the house they were renting. I didn't say anything. They're staying with some friend of Mom's, he went on, voice flat. But it's temporary. They don't have any savings left. No backup plan. I folded my arms. And? He hesitated. And? I don't know. I thought you should know. I let out a slow breath, steadying myself against the old, familiar pull of obligation. The instinct to step in, to fix things, to help. But I didn't owe them that. I didn't owe him that. I tilted my head, studying him. And what about you? He let out a short, humorless laugh. I'm figuring things out. That was the difference between us. I had been figuring things out my whole life. I had never had the luxury of believing someone else would catch me if I fell. I had never been able to crash and burn, knowing there would be someone to pick me up. Ethan had finally run out of people to save him, and I could see now that he knew it. You asked me once if leaving them was worth it, I said quietly. He nodded. I met his gaze. It was. A flicker of something crossed his face. Understanding, resignation, acceptance. He didn't argue, didn't deflect. He just nodded. Yeah, he murmured. I think I get that now. And that was it. No grand reconciliation. No dramatic apology. Just two siblings standing in the quiet, both knowing that some things couldn't be undone. Some bridges weren't meant to be rebuilt. And some people had to be left behind. The next day, I drove by the old neighborhood one last time. Not to torture myself, not to mourn, but to say goodbye. The house was still there, still changed beyond recognition. But this time, it didn't feel like a wound. It didn't feel like a loss. It just felt like a house. Not mine. Not anymore. And that was okay, because I was finally free. My parents sold my childhood home to fund my brother's business. Now they expect me to take them in. The knock came late at night. 3 slow, deliberate raps against the heavy oak of my front door, hesitant yet insistent. I had been expecting it. Not in the literal sense, not tonight, not exactly. But deep down, I had known this moment was inevitable. Karma always makes her rounds. I set my glass of juice down on the marble countertop, exhaling slowly as I stood from the plush leather chair in my penthouse. The city skyline glittered behind me, a testament to the life I had built for myself. By myself, without handouts, without anyone believing in me. As I made my way to the door, I braced myself, already knowing who would be on the other side. And when I swung it open, there they were. My parents. Their faces were gaunt, aged beyond their years, shadows of the proud, self-assured people they had once been. My father stood stiffly, his once neatly groomed hair now thinning, his shirt wrinkled in a way that suggested it had been worn for far too many days in a row. My mother clutched the strap of her worn-out purse like a lifeline, her lips pressed together in an uneasy smile. Between them, standing slightly behind, was my brother, Ethan, the golden child, the prodigal son, the one for whom the world had always bent over backward. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in our lives, he didn't look superior. He didn't look smug. He didn't look like the untouchable favorite. He looked defeated. I let the silence stretch between us, let the weight of it settle over their shoulders as they stood there, waiting. Finally, my mother broke first. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice laced with an artificial warmth, the same patronizing tone she had always used when trying to manipulate me. "We were hoping we could come in." I tilted my head slightly, feigning curiosity. "Why?" A flicker of something, nervousness, shame, crossed her face before she schooled her features into something softer. "We just wanted to talk. As a family." Family. Funny how they only used that word when they needed something. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I don't think that word means what you think it means." Ethan cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Look, we get it, okay?" His voice lacked its usual arrogance, but there was still an edge of entitlement underneath. "We messed up. But right now we don't have anywhere else to go." There it was. The real reason they were here. I let the words hang between us, savoring the way they squirmed under my gaze. These were the same people who had thrown me aside without a second thought. The same parents who had sold the only home I had ever known. Not out of necessity, not because we were struggling, but because Ethan needed capital for his dream business. "It's an investment in the future," my father had told me, his tone dismissive, as if I were a fool for questioning their decision. "Your brother has potential. You'll understand someday." That house had been more than just walls and a roof. It had been where I learned to ride a bike, where I stayed up late reading under the covers, where I had belonged, and they had ripped it away as if my memories, my attachment, meant nothing. All because Ethan's dreams were more important than my existence. And now? Now the dream had failed. The business, his great business, the one that had been worth everything, had collapsed. The money was gone. And they, the people who had once acted as if I were an afterthought, had nowhere left to turn. Now, they needed me. I took a slow, deliberate step back, crossing the threshold into my home without inviting them in. "So, let me get this straight," I said, my tone even, controlled. "Years ago, you sold my childhood home, didn't even ask me how I felt about it, didn't care where I went or what I did. You gave everything to Ethan, and when he lost it all, you still didn't reach out to me. Not until now. Not until you had no one else." A guilty silence. My father exhaled heavily, his jaw tightening. "It's not as simple as you're making it sound." I laughed, sharp and cold. "Oh, it's exactly that simple." My mother stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "We had no choice." I held up a hand. "Number, you made a choice, a very clear one, and now you have to live with it." Ethan's fists clenched. "Look, are you going to help us or not?" Ah, there it was. The entitlement. The belief that no matter how badly they treated me, I would always owe them something. I studied him for a long moment, watching the way his jaw twitched, the way his eyes refused to meet mine for more than a few seconds. I wondered if it ever occurred to him, to any of them, that there were consequences for the way they had treated me. That maybe, just maybe, I didn't owe them a damn thing. I let out a slow breath and finally spoke. "I'll think about it." Relief flickered in my mother's expression. "Oh, sweetheart." I held up a finger, cutting her off. "On one condition." They stilled. Even Ethan. I took another step back, gesturing toward the city behind me. "I want you to go back to where you're staying, if you even have anywhere left, and really think about what you did. I want you to remember every time you dismissed me, every time you belittled me, every time you told me I didn't matter." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, But I wasn't done. And then, I want you to ask yourselves a very simple question. I let the pause linger, my voice dipping into something colder, sharper. Do you deserve my help? The air was thick with tension, their silence speaking louder than any words could. I had the power, and they knew it. Finally, my father exhaled, his shoulders sagging under the weight of reality. Without another word, he turned, walking away. My mother hesitated, eyes glassy with unshed tears before following. Ethan lingered the longest. You think you've won, he muttered. I smiled. Oh, I know I have. And then, just like that, he was gone. I shut the door behind them, the finality of it settling in my chest. Let them sit with their choices. Let them taste the bitter reality of being abandoned. Let them feel what it was like to be me all those years ago. I wasn't the forgotten child. I was the one calling the shots. The silence in my penthouse stretched long after the door had shut behind them. I stood there for a moment, my fingers still resting on the handle, exhaling slowly, as the reality of the situation settled over me. They had actually come to me. After years of treating me like I was insignificant, after selling the only home I had ever known to fund Ethan's doomed business, after making it clear I was nothing more than an afterthought, they had dared to stand at my door and ask for help. The audacity was almost impressive. Almost. I turned away from the entrance, making my way toward the vast windows that overlooked the city. The skyline stretched endlessly before me, glowing in the night, a reminder of how far I had come. Every building, every shining light, felt like proof of what I had built without them. Proof that I had survived, that I had thrived, despite being abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. And now they were homeless, desperate, and looking to me for salvation. I should have felt something, pity, anger, satisfaction, but instead, I felt nothing, because they had made their choice a long time ago, and now they had to live with it. The first call came the next morning. I was sitting in my home office going through reports from one of my latest investments when my phone buzzed. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. I let it ring. Then came another call, and another. By noon, I had ignored at least 10 attempts from my mother alone. By evening, Ethan joined in, followed by my father, each call more insistent than the last. Still, I refused to answer, because I wanted them to wait. I wanted them to sit in their discomfort, to feel the same weight of uncertainty that I had once carried every day when I had no one to turn to. When I had struggled to pay rent, when I had wondered if I would make it another month without going under. Back then, I had been forced to deal with it alone. Now, it was their turn. On the third day, I finally picked up. Not because I had any intention of giving them what they wanted, but because I wanted to hear them squirm. Hello? I answered, keeping my voice neutral. A sharp inhale. Then, sweetheart, my mother breathed, her relief practically radiating through the phone. I've been trying to reach you. I know. A pause, then a nervous chuckle. I was worried something had happened. I leaned back in my chair, smirking. Or maybe you were worried I wasn't going to call back at all. Another pause, a shift in her tone. Look, I know you're upset. I cut her off, my voice turning colder. Upset? No, Mom, I'm not upset. I just find it interesting. How suddenly, after all these years, you need me. Funny how that works. She exhaled sharply. I didn't call to argue. Then why did you call? I asked, feigning curiosity. She hesitated, and I could feel the struggle on the other end of the line. She wanted to spin this, to manipulate the conversation the way she always had, but for once, she was at a disadvantage. Finally, she spoke. We just need a place to stay for a little while. Just until we get back on our feet. I let the words hang between us for a moment before responding. And where was this concern for me when I needed a place to stay? That was different, she said quickly, almost too quickly. You were young. You needed to learn responsibility. I laughed, the sound bitter. No, Mom. What I needed was a family who actually gave a damn about me. But you made your priorities very clear. She started to say something else, but I was already done. "Good luck," I said simply, and then I hung up. The phone rang again, almost immediately. This time, I let it go straight to voicemail. By the end of the week, the messages shifted. The first few had been polite. Then, they had turned impatient. And now they were dripping with guilt-tripping and manipulation. "You're really going to let your own parents suffer? We took care of you for years, and this is how you repay us. You're being spiteful. We're still your family." Spiteful. That one made me laugh. Was it spiteful to finally stand up for myself? Was it spiteful to refuse to be used? Was it spiteful to force them to finally deal with the consequences of their actions? If so, then fine. Let them call it spite. I called it justice. A few nights later, I got another visit. I had just finished a late meeting and was stepping out of my car when I saw someone waiting by the entrance of my building. Ethan. His usual arrogance was gone. Instead, he looked exhausted, disheveled, like a man who had spent the last few nights in cheap motels or sleeping in his car. I could have ignored him, could have walked right past him and into the warmth of my penthouse without giving him a second glance. But I didn't, because I wanted to hear what he had to say. "Wow," I mused, stepping closer. "You're really pulling out all the stops, huh?" Ethan exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "Look, I get it. You're pissed, and you have every right to be." I raised a brow. "That's the first honest thing you've ever said to me." His jaw tightened. "I'm serious. I know we treated you like shit. I know Mom and Dad screwed you over, but this..." He gestured around, his voice cracking slightly. "This is bad, man. They don't have anywhere to go. And that's my problem because you're not like them," he shot back. "You're better than this." Ah, there it was. The classic attempt to appeal to my morality. The same morality they had mocked when I was struggling. I tilted my head, considering. Better than what exactly? Better than the people who tossed me aside? Who let me suffer while they worshipped the ground you walked on? Ethan clenched his jaw. "I'm asking for a chance." I studied him, searching for any real remorse in his face. But there was none, just desperation. And that told me everything I needed to know. "You know," I said quietly, stepping closer, "if you had come to me years ago, before everything fell apart, maybe I would have helped. Maybe if you had shown an ounce of concern for me when I was struggling, I would have cared." Ethan swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably. "But you didn't," I continued. "And now? Now it's too late." His hands curled into fists at his sides. "So that's it? You're just going to throw us away?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "You threw me away first." I turned and walked past him without another word, stepping into the lobby of my building. I expected the silence to last longer. After Ethan's pathetic attempt at guilt-tripping me in front of my own building, I assumed they would finally accept the inevitable, that I wasn't the naive, desperate for approval child they once dismissed, that I wasn't their safety net, that I wasn't going to save them. But people like them don't learn. They don't reflect. They don't change. They just get more desperate. The next morning, the calls started again. Not just from my mother, my father, or Ethan. No, they had upgraded their campaign. This time, it was relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Distant aunts and uncles who never so much as sent a birthday card when I was a kid. Cousins who had once looked down on me for not following in Ethan's golden child footsteps. They all had something to say. "You know, family is family, no matter what. I heard about your parents' situation. You should really reconsider helping them. You don't want to live with regrets, do you?" I ignored them. Every last one. Until one particular call caught my attention. Leo. My cousin. The only relative who had ever stood by me when I had nothing. The moment I saw his name flash across my screen, I debated answering. Leo wasn't like the others. He wasn't a manipulator or a liar. He had always been the black sheep of the extended family, the one who had warned me, years ago, that our parents would never change. If he was calling, it meant something. So I picked up. "They're not giving up," Leo said without preamble. I exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of my nose. I figured... "No, you don't get it," he said, his voice tight with something I couldn't quite place. "They're trying something else now." I frowned. "What do you mean?" A pause, then, "They're telling people you owe them." I let out a dry laugh. Owe them? For what? For everything. Leo sighed heavily. They're spinning this whole sob story, telling everyone that they sacrificed so much for you, that they only sold the house because it was the only way to keep you afloat, and that you turned your back on them after they gave you everything. I clenched my jaw. Unbelievable. Oh, it gets worse, Leo said darkly. They've been talking to people. Important people. People in your business circles. That made me pause. My stomach turned, a slow, cold wave of anger creeping into my veins. I had spent years clawing my way up in my industry, building a reputation that had nothing to do with my family and everything to do with my own blood, sweat, and sacrifice. And now, they were trying to poison it? They don't even realize how stupid they're being, Leo continued. They think that if they make you look bad, you'll have to help them, like they're backing you into a corner. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. They really think they can manipulate me like this? That's all they know how to do, Leo muttered. I ran a hand over my face, exhaling slowly. Thanks for telling me, man. I owe you. You don't owe me shit, Leo said firmly. Just promise me one thing. I raised a brow. What? Make sure they regret it. Oh, I intended to. The first sign that my parents were actively trying to damage my reputation came the next day. One of my business partners, Julia, a no-nonsense investor who valued integrity above all else, sent me a brief clipped email. Hey, just a heads up, someone's been whispering about you. Some sob story about how you abandoned your family after they sacrificed everything for you. You might want to get ahead of this before it spreads. Let me know if you need me to handle anything. I stared at the email, my blood boiling. They had really done it. They had really gone there. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to remain calm. Losing my temper wouldn't help. No, I needed to play this smart. So I did what I did best. I flipped the script. By noon, I had made a call to my PR team. By evening, a carefully crafted message was circulating through the same circles my parents had tried to poison against me. Success isn't always celebrated. Sometimes it's resented. After years of being overlooked and discarded by my own family, I chose to build a life on my own. And now that I've succeeded, the same people who once laughed at my struggles are rewriting history. But the truth always comes out in the end. It wasn't direct, it wasn't aggressive, but it was enough. Within hours, the same people my parents had tried to turn against me were reaching out. Not with concern, no, with curiosity. Is everything okay? I heard some things, but now I'm not sure what to believe. Your family's been talking, but honestly, it doesn't line up with what I know about you. If you need me to shut something down, say the word. It was over before it even began. My parents had underestimated one simple fact. They were nobodies in my world now. And I had power. I didn't call them. I didn't reach out. But that didn't stop my mother from trying one last time. She called late that night, her voice tired, strained. I hope you're happy, she said bitterly. I leaned back in my chair, smirking. Oh, I am. You humiliated us, she continued. You made us look like fools. You are fools, I corrected. You tried to destroy me and now you're mad that it backfired? You should have known better. She inhaled sharply, as if trying to keep her composure. This isn't how family treats each other. I laughed, slow and deliberate. You're right. It's not. But you made it very clear a long time ago that I was never really family to you. Silence. I let it stretch, savoring the weight of it. Then, finally, she whispered, We have nowhere to go. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting that sink in. Then, I opened them, my voice calm, final. Not my problem. I hung up. My phone was silent. No more calls, no more manipulative messages, no more guilt-tripping attempts from my mother or arrogant demands from Ethan, no more underhanded smear campaigns designed to back me into a corner. It was over, and they knew it. I had won. And yet, as I sat in my penthouse, overlooking the city I had built my life in, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Because for years, I had been carrying the weight of their rejection, their favoritism, their blatant disregard for me. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove something to people who never cared, trying to be enough for a family that had made it clear I was nothing more than an afterthought. But now, that weight was gone. I was done. Completely and utterly done. A few weeks passed and life moved on. My business continued thriving. My reputation remained untarnished despite my parents' pitiful attempts at sabotage. My life, one that I had built without them, was exactly how I wanted it. Then, one day I got an unexpected email. Not from my family. No, they had finally learned their lesson. It was from Leo. "Hey, thought you might want to know. Your parents finally packed up and left town. No one's heard from them since. Ethan too. Looks like they realized they weren't going to get a handout and decided to try their luck somewhere else. Just figured you'd want to know. Hope you're doing well." I stared at the email for a long moment, absorbing the finality of it. They were gone. Not just from my life, but from the city itself. From the network of people they had desperately tried to manipulate. From the house of cards they had built for themselves, only to watch it crumble beneath them. They had lost everything, and they had nowhere left to turn. I thought about that for a moment, about the people who had once stood so high above me, looking down, convinced of their own superiority. The parents who had chosen my brother over me, who had sold my childhood home without a second thought, who had left me to struggle while handing Ethan the world on a silver platter. And now, they were the ones who had nothing. I exhaled slowly, the realization settling over me like a quiet, inevitable truth. I didn't feel sorry for them. I didn't feel anything for them. They had made their choices. And now, they were living with the consequences. That night, I stood on my balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly before me. The wind was crisp, carrying with it the scent of something new, something untainted. For so long, my past had been an anchor around my neck. The resentment, the bitterness, the desire to prove myself to people who would never care. But now, that past was gone. I had severed the last ties. I had no regrets, no lingering doubts, no unfinished business. Just a future that was entirely, completely my own. I took one last sip of my coffee, letting the warmth settle in my chest. Then, with a final glance at the city, the life I had built without them, I turned and stepped inside, shutting the door behind me, and I never looked back.